Ever wonder what it feels like to realize you are just another piece of equipment that needs fixing after a lifetime of keeping everything else running smoothly? Well, hang on tight, because I am about to tell you how I found out the hard way that sometimes the people you built a life for are the ones who cannot find a single minute to help you stand back up. Welcome to Dad's Raw. Welcome to a father's real story, and you better get settled in, because this story is going to take you on a real journey. Do me a favor and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from, and go ahead and hit that like button and make sure you are subscribed, because I promise you are going to want to hear how this all plays out. My name is Henry Caldwell, and I spent 40 years of my life working as an engineer, which means I have a real good handle on exactly how much stress a structure can take before it finally snaps. But I never, in a million years, thought I would be applying that kind of math to my own children. Over the course of my life, I have swapped out 2 water heaters and put a brand new roof on the house, along with rebuilding 3 different car engines and laying down an entire kitchen floor. But I sure did not expect my own hip to be the next thing on the repair list. My surgeon was a young guy named Dr. Leonard who looked to be in his early 40s, and he had that quiet way of talking that people get when they have done the same job 800 times. He told me that getting a hip replaced at 78 years old was a very routine procedure, but he said it the way folks talk about minor surgery when it is not their own body laying there on the table. I just nodded my head politely because I have been nodding politely at people for 78 years now, and it is probably the best skill I have, even though it has never done me a single bit of good. I gave my 3 kids 6 full weeks of notice before my surgery date, and I want you to really let that number sink in for a minute, because 42 days is a lot of time for a person to circle a date on a calendar, or find a babysitter, or take a half day off work, or even just drive down Interstate 65 to Bowling Green, Kentucky, to sit with their father before he goes under general anesthesia at 78 years old. But I am going to tell you exactly what each of them did with those 42 days. Victor Caldwell is my oldest at 49 years old, and he called me on a Tuesday evening back in September while I could hear some sports game playing on the TV in the background, and I could tell by the way he was talking that he was busy scrolling through his phone. At the same time, he told me not to worry because they would all be there for me. And then he moved right along with real efficiency to ask if I had spoken to anyone lately about the property values over on Sycamore Lane. Like he was just making small talk to pass the time, my second child, Sophie Caldwell, sent me a voice message that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds. And I know that for a fact because I played it back 3 times, trying to find an actual plan in there somewhere. She said she was so sorry about the timing, because work had become impossible, and her husband, Ethan Brooks, had some work thing, and the kids had school things, but she promised she would absolutely, definitely figure it out and be there. She used the phrase, "Of course, Dad," 4 times in those 4 minutes, which I reckon is a personal record for acting sincere without actually saying anything at all. And then there was Lila Caldwell, who called me on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks before the big day, while I was standing in the kitchen making a sandwich, and I felt that little spark of warmth you get when you see a name on the screen from someone you love, even if they have let you down more times than you can count. I picked up on the second ring, and she asked how I was feeling about the surgery, and I told her I was nervous but ready. She said that was good, and then she got real quiet for a second, the kind of quiet I have known since she was 19 years old, before she told me she was actually in a bit of a spot and was short on her rent this month. She asked if I could help her out, and since she is 30 years old and I am her father, I said yes because I always say yes. So I sent the money right there from my phone while she was still talking, and she just said, "Thanks. Dad, feel better," and hung up the phone. She never showed up for the surgery, and she never called while I was there, and as far as I can tell, she never gave it another thought once that money hit her account. I want to stop for a second and tell you about the morning of my operation, because it is important, and I have not told another soul yet. I woke up at 5:15 in my house on Sycamore Lane, and the whole place was quiet in that heavy way a big house gets when there is only one person left living inside it. It was not exactly peaceful, but it was the kind of quiet that has a real weight to it. I made a pot of coffee. I knew I was not allowed to drink and sat in my chair by the window, watching the sun come up over the trees, painting everything in that thin Kentucky gold you only see in October, and I sat there thinking that if the surgery didn't go as planned, the very last conversation I had with my youngest child was her asking me for rent money. I thought about that for a long time before I ordered a ride to the hospital and checked myself in, handing my phone over to a nurse named Denise Harper to hold during the procedure. They kept me in there for 13 days, because recovering from a hip replacement is a massive ordeal. No matter what Dr. Leonard and his calm attitude want you to believe, there is a kind of pain that introduces itself to you in the dead of night, like a guest you never wanted in your house. And there is the shame of using a walker and a bedpan, and needing someone to help you do things you have been doing on your own since you were 2 years old. But there is a specific kind of loneliness that only exists in hospital rooms, and it is not the loneliness of being alone, which I have made my peace with, but the loneliness of being surrounded by beeping machines and bright lights, and the sounds of other families in the hallway while you stare at the empty chair next to your bed. I looked at that chair every single day. What do you think was going through Albert's mind during those 13 days in the hospital? Have you ever sat in a room and watched an empty chair until it started to tell you the truth about your own life? Well, I did, and let me tell you, it is a lot harder to face than any surgery. That chair was made of blue vinyl, and it sat there crooked on its left leg, so it tilted just a tiny bit to one side. I ended up memorizing every inch of that thing, like it was a scar on my own skin. Victor Caldwell called me on day 2, and then again on day 5. On that second day, he asked how I was doing. But by the time day 5 rolled around, he was asking if I had a solid filing system for my money papers, because he thought it might be a good idea to get organized. At some point, he told me there was no rush, but I told him my papers were already in perfect order. I've been an engineer for 40 years, so every single document I own is labeled and dated and tucked away in a cabinet in my study. Sophie Caldwell called every single day for the first 6 days, which might sound real devoted until you realize every talk only lasted about 4 minutes and was nothing but a list of reasons why she had not made it over to see me. Yet she was real creative with those excuses, talking about traffic, or a stomach bug that turned out not to be a bug at all, or a school play that was actually just a practice session, or some work deadline that kept moving around on day 7. She swore she was coming on day 9, but when day 9 came, she stayed home and just sent a text saying she was sorry and something came up and that she loved me. I read that message and set my phone down on the blue table and just stared at that vinyl chair, and I felt something inside me move. It wasn't some big explosion or a fit of anger. It was more like a foundation shifting slow and steady and permanent. Lila Caldwell never called a single time after she got that rent money on day 7. A nurse named Denise Harper, who was in her 50s, and had that kind of warmth you only get from seeing everything there is to see in this world, came in to check my vitals while I was reading a book. She looked at that empty chair, and then she looked at me real gentle and asked if I had any family, and I just smiled and said, yes, I did. She nodded her head like she understood the things I wasn't saying, and before she left, she squeezed my hand just one time, and I've thought about that moment every day since on day 13. Dr. Leonard signed the papers and told me my recovery was looking great. Then he shook my hand and a volunteer wheeled me out to the exit in one of those mandatory wheelchairs, which felt a bit silly to me. I called an Uber, and a young guy named Jordan Reed picked me up and asked if I had a good stay. I told him it was a hospital, and he just laughed. We drove 20 minutes back to Sycamore Lane in a nice kind of silence that you choose for yourself. He helped me to the door with my bag, and I thanked him and watched him walk back to his car. I just stood there on my own porch for a minute looking at the door. Hung with my own hands back in '89, and that brass handle I replaced a couple times, and even the little crack in the wood I always meant to fix. I went inside and found the house exactly the way I left it 13 days ago. Which sounds simple, but it really isn't when you live alone and you are gone that long and come back to find everything the same. It means nobody ever came by to water the plant on the window or pick up the mail or just be there in the house. I put my bag down and moved slow through the kitchen to put the kettle on the stove because my body was still trying to figure out how to work again. I stood there looking at the backyard and the rose bushes and the bench I built 20 years ago, and everything was just as I left it. I thought about that empty blue chair in room 114 and how it sat there day after day waiting for someone who never showed up. I thought about Denise Harper asking about my family and how much that smile cost me, and I thought about Lila. Caldwell's voice saying, "Thanks. Dad, feel better?" I realized that I love my kids the way I build things with the right materials and a mind for what will last, because love isn't a deal you make or a show you put on when things get tough. I finished my tea and sat in my chair by the window where the October light was coming in all golden and sad, and I sat there for a while in that heavy kind of quiet. I spent 13 days figuring some things out, and when I was done, I did not call my kids. I called Charles Whitaker, who has been my lawyer for 26 years, because it was time for me to do a little engineering and start redesigning the future of everything I built. If you have been sticking with me this long, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because a lot of people watch these without ever doing it, and it really helps us out more than, go ahead and hit that like button while you are here and tell me what you are thinking in the comments, because I want to tell you something about how an engineer thinks we do not just react to things, we respond, and there is a massive difference between those two. A reaction is just a knee-jerk move or a door slammed in a fit of rage, while a response is something you measure and calculate, where you look at the load and figure out the right structural fix, then build it to last. And that is exactly what I did with my lawyer Charles Whitaker, who has been handling my business for 26 years. He is a patient and precise man, which are two things I have a lot of respect for. After working with people who had neither of those traits, I called him from my kitchen that October evening while I was still leaning on my walker and feeling tender in ways I do not care to talk about, and he just sat there listening for 11 minutes while I laid out exactly what I wanted done. When I was finished, he asked if I was sure, and I told him I had been dead certain. Since day 7 in that hospital, he said he would get the paperwork ready, and I thanked him before hanging up to finish my tea, while the neighborhood settled into its evening sounds of lawnmowers and barking dogs and a freight train off in the distance. Just ordinary sounds of a life that keeps moving whether anyone bothers to show up for it or not. About 6 weeks after I got out of that hospital bed, I called up all 3 of my kids and invited them over for dinner. And I want to be real clear about what I was doing that night, because precision is everything to me. I was not trying to act weak or set some kind of trap. I was just giving them the chance to show me who they really were, so I could remember it. I made the cornbread from scratch using their mother's old recipe, which is a memory all on its own, and I set the table with the nice placemats and put some Coltrane on the stereo, so I looked for all the world like a happy 78-year-old man who was just glad to have his family around him. Victor Caldwell showed up first because he always makes sure to be. The first one there is a way of proving how reliable and devoted he is. He walked in with a $40 bottle of red wine and gave me a hug that lasted just a second too long, like he had practiced it before he got there. Then I watched his eyes scan the whole living room, looking at the crown molding and the fireplace and the shelves I built back in '87. Before he peeked into the kitchen at the new counters and appliances, he gave me a big smile and told me the place looked great, but I knew he was just doing a professional appraisal in his head. Sophie Caldwell showed up right on time with the store, bought peach cobbler in her hands, like she was hoping a dessert would make up for everything else. She gave me a long hug, and I could feel how relieved she was to see I was standing up on my own. Then she sat down and started rolling out a list of reasons why she never made it to the hospital. She talked about stomach bugs and Ethan Brooks' work and the kids and some plumbing problem that I am pretty sure never actually happened. She kept saying how terrible she felt about it, but I just listened with the patience of a man who has spent 40 years reading technical reports, which means I took the info in without reacting and saved it. For later, I told her I understood, and she looked like she could finally breathe again, so I just passed her the cornbread. Lila Caldwell showed up 38 minutes late with that bored look on her face she has had since she was a teenager, like she is just waiting for something better to happen. Somewhere else. She kissed my cheek and sat down without saying a word about the hospital or the money she borrowed, and she spent half the meal checking her phone. I sat there watching all three of them. Victor Caldwell looking at my bookshelves, Sophie Caldwell laughing a little too loud at my jokes, and Lila Caldwell eating, like she had no idea she was being tested for something. Then I put my fork down and mentioned that the surgery got me thinking about getting my affairs in order. I told them I had been working with Michael to make sure everything was where it needed to be when the time comes, and I saw the whole energy at the table shift as they all sat up a little straighter. Victor Caldwell said, "That sounded sensible," and Sophie Caldwell told me it was the responsible thing to do. So I just picked my fork back up and asked if anyone wanted more cornbread. Over the next few months, things started moving with the kind of inevitability you get when you engineer something the right way. Victor Caldwell started calling every single Sunday at 10 on the dot, asking about my health and my appetite, and even asking about my knee when it was my hip I had surgery on. And after 15 minutes of playing the devoted son, he would always find a way to ask about the house. Or if I had talked to a financial advisor lately, Sophie Caldwell started showing up every Thursday with bags of actual groceries like the coffee brand I like and that specific wheat bread soup she knows I enjoy. She was being real pleasant company, but sitting there across from her I just felt a deep kind of grief, not for what was happening then, but for the fact that she could have been this person all along. She could have shown up on day 3 or day 10 and sat in that blue vinyl chair to just be there for me, but she chose not to. And seeing her do it now just made me realize that the daughter I needed was right here. The whole time she just didn't think I was worth the effort until there was something in it for her. And if you have been listening for a while, do us one quick favor and subscribe, because a lot of people watch without ever doing it, and it really helps us keep the lights on. What do you think Albert has planned for his children now that he's seen their true colors? You ever wonder if a yellow jacket and a coffee cake can make up for 13 days of being invisible? Well, I'm about to tell you how I kept a secret that is going to change my kids' lives forever, and why I am perfectly okay with them not knowing the truth just yet, because sometimes the only way to teach a real lesson is to let the silence do the talking for you. I sat there sipping my coffee and chatting with Sophie Caldwell about her garden and the grandkids, and I made sure to be as welcoming as I have always been. Even Lila Caldwell started sending these short little text messages that weren't exactly perfect on the grammar, but they were a start. She would check in to see how I was doing, or mention that it was getting chilly outside, and one time she even sent me a photo of a sunset, without saying a single word, which I figured was her own way of being a bit of a poet. I made sure to answer every one of them with complete sentences and proper manners because I am 78 years old. And I was raised to do things the right way. They kept up with the calls and the visits, and they put on this big show of being devoted, but I could see it for what it really was, an investment they were making in their own future. I let them come around and I cooked for them and laughed at their jokes while asking all about their lives without ever bringing up that stay in the hospital. Not a single time I did not give them anything to fight against or any reason to apologize or negotiate, because the hospital was something I had already handled on my own, and I did not need them to say they were sorry. I just needed them to understand the weight of things. And in my experience, people understand things better through consequences than through a talk, and those consequences were already signed and sealed in Michael's office. It is March now, which is about 5 months since I had that surgery, and I am sitting out on my front porch on Sycamore Lane with a cup of joe, feeling that specific kind of satisfaction a man gets when his affairs are all in order. The Kentucky morning is doing what it always does this time of year by arguing with itself about whether it is still winter or if spring has finally arrived. The dogwood tree in the front yard is thinking about blooming, and the Harrow boy a few houses down is having a real hard time getting his lawnmower to turn over. I watched a cardinal sit on my porch railing for about 11 seconds, looking at me like I did not owe it a thing before it flew off, and I think about that bird more than I probably should. My hip feels real good. Actually, it feels better than good. And I have to say Dr. Leonard did some fine work. I walk 2 miles every morning now, which is more than I ever did before the operation. So maybe that whole ordeal did me some good mechanically. Even if it proved there were some structural weaknesses in other parts of my life, I've always been better at noticing where things are starting to fail than most people. And I guess that is just my engineering background talking. I made a donation last month to the Hospital Foundation for a specific fund that helps keep patients comfortable by getting them warm blankets and better chairs for the rooms where people have to wait all by themselves. I did it in the name of Denise Harper, the nurse who squeezed my hand that one time, but I did not tell a soul, because I did not have to. Now when you look at my will, you are going to find 3 charities, where the names of my 3 children used to be the first, is a veterans group out of Louisville for the men and women who had to keep things together when nobody was coming to help them either. And the second is an engineering scholarship at Western Kentucky University, because I believe in building things that are meant to last, and a young mind with the right tools is the strongest structure. I know how to support the third, is a children's hospital fund, because those kids never chose to be in those beds in the first place. My house on Sycamore Lane with its 4 bedrooms and the crown molding, I put in myself back in '87, along with the rose bushes that have been blooming since '95, is all going to the estate to be sold off for those same charities. Michael knows exactly what to do because he has known since October, and he is a patient and precise man who will handle everything just the way I asked. There is also one more paper in the file, which is a letter I wrote by hand in my drafting print, using the small clean letters of a man who spent 40 years making sure his measurements could be read. It is addressed to Victor Caldwell and Sophie Caldwell and Lila Caldwell, to be opened after I am gone, and I will tell you what it says. It says that by the time they read it, they will have plenty of questions. So I wanted to answer the one that matters most because I was an engineer for 40 years, and I believe in giving accurate info. I told them I was in the hospital for 13 days after my hip surgery, and I reminded them that I gave them 6 weeks of notice because people deserve to know the exact load-bearing reasons for a decision. I did not write it out of anger. I wrote it so they would know the facts. I told them I still love them because that part never changed, but I hope the charities find the house useful. Sophie Caldwell showed up at 11 today with a coffee cake and that bright look on her face she gets when she has decided it is going to be a good visit. She was wearing that yellow jacket she knows I like, and she came through the gate calling for her dad, even though she could see me sitting right there on the porch, which is a habit she has had since she was 7 years old, and something I have always liked. She sat in the other chair and we talked about her daughter's science project and the price of food, and if it was warm enough to start planting. Yet she is real good company, and she always was when she bothered to show up. I looked at her over the rim of my coffee cup and realized she is truly lovable. She has her mother's hands and she knows just when to laugh, and I do love her. That is not a complicated thing. You can love someone and still change your will, and you can love someone and still let them face the results of their own choices. You can love someone completely and honestly and still refuse to pretend that 13 days of staring at an empty chair was anything other than what it was. She has no idea what is coming, and she thinks she is winning back her father and her inheritance with these Thursday visits, and in the way it matters for a father, she is giving me back the kids I thought I had lost, and I am grateful for that. But the paperwork does not know anything about a yellow jacket Victor Caldwell called right on time at 10 this morning, and we talked for 18 minutes while he asked me all about my sleep and my hip. You want to know how a story about a broken hip ends with a quiet cup of coffee and a secret that's going to leave 3 grown adults absolutely speechless. Well, pull up that chair, the sturdy one, not the tilted blue vinyl one, because the final calculations are in. Victor Caldwell called right on cue. At this point, his punctuality is as reliable as a load calculation. He mentioned a house a few streets over sold for a killing. "Just interesting," he said. "Just thinking about the market, Dad." I just looked out at my dogwood tree, which was blooming right on schedule whether anyone asked it to or not. I told him, "I know you are, Victor Caldwell, I know." The truest thing ever said. Then, something unprecedented happened. Lila Caldwell called on a Tuesday. No preamble, no request for rent money. She asked if I wanted to get lunch, just the two of us. She told me, "I feel like I don't know you that well, Dad. Is that a weird thing to say?" I sat very still. It wasn't weird. It was the truest thing she'd said in years. It was also, from an engineering perspective, about 5 months too late to change the structural integrity of my will. But I am her father, and the dogwood is blooming, so I said I'd like that very much. We had dinner that Saturday. She ordered pancakes, I had eggs. We talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with money or duty. She asked about my work, what I actually built. I told her about the bridge project in 1987, the water treatment facility, the time a miscalculation cost us 3 weeks of progress. She listened. She laughed. Then she said, "I'm sorry I didn't come, Dad, to the hospital. I've been trying to figure out how to say that for months." I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't. I didn't say, "Don't worry about it," because a daughter should worry about leaving her 78-year-old father alone in a surgery ward. I just said, "I know. I mean it too. I know exactly who she is now. The invisible work. It's April now. I'm back in my garden on Sycamore Lane. My rose bushes are coming back with no drama and no announcement. I've had pot roast with my children several times since the Affairs in Order dinner. They are, in the ways they choose to be, good company. They think they are inheriting this house. What they are actually inheriting are Saturday mornings, cornbread, and a father who remains warm despite everything. The paperwork? That's in Michael's department. The house, the molding I installed with my own hands, the years of maintenance. It's all going to the charities. The veterans who had no one, the students who want to build things that last, and the children who didn't choose to be in a hospital bed. In engineering, the most important work is invisible. It's the stress test before the build. It's the measurement that looks like nothing until the structure stands for 50 years and everyone forgets to wonder why it hasn't fallen. I built my house well. I documented everything. When the time comes, Michael will open that file and everything will go exactly where I decided it should go back in October when I was sitting with a walker and 13 days of cold, hard information. My children will call it many things when they find out. They'll likely call it unfair or cold. I'll call it a sound structure, but I won't be there to hear their side of it, and honestly, sitting here in the April sun with my coffee, that is the least troubling thought I've had in a very long time. Everything is exactly where it needs to be. Thanks for riding along with Story. Welcome to A Father's Real Story channel. If this story hit home for you, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.